Today I'm going to do something that I wanted to do for a very long time, and that is create a tier list of digital audio workstations based on their ability to work with Dolby Atmos. I've chosen 20 digital audio workstations, most of which I've worked with personally, and I'm going to rank them based on how well they can handle Dolby Atmos projects. Now, before I get started, I need to point out that there are three distinct ways on how you can integrate Dolby Atmos into your production workflow. First, there's the traditional way of using the external Dolby Atmos renderer from Dolby. This unfortunately requires that you use a Mac because not all of the functionality needed in the renderer is available on Windows. Second, many digital audio workstations have started to integrate internal Dolby Atmos workflows. These usually have slightly scaled down functionality when it comes to Dolby Atmos, but are perfectly appropriate for Dolby Atmos music production. And third, there's the Dolby Atmos Composer from Fiedler Audio. The main advantage of the Dolby Atmos Composer is that it works pretty much with any digital audio workstation. So depending on what DAW you're using, the Dolby Atmos Composer might actually be your only option. Now finally, a quick reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons. We have recently reached 25,000 subscribers, and I think we can do even better than that. Your support is greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's jump right into our tier list. So here I have my tier list. Now before I start, I should point out that I have not scripted this video. I actually have no clue what I'm going to put where. I'm actually really interested myself what the final result is going to be. So let's see how this turns out. Now let's get started. So the first one here is Reaper. Now Reaper is an interesting one because Reaper technically is one of those digital audio workstations that is very well used in the immersive audio space, primarily because of its ability to work with Ambisonics audio and most importantly also its routing capabilities. So it's really kind of good when it comes to having multi-channel audio that you need to route creatively around. So for many immersive audio applications that require lots of channels, this is actually really good. However, when it comes to Dolby Atmos, Reaper is a little bit of a letdown. There isn't really an internal implementation of Dolby Atmos. So you can use the external Dolby Atmos renderer, and that is perfectly fine if you're on a Mac. If you're on Windows, you need to go with the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, and there you have a little bit of an issue in that the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer works best if the digital audio workstation has post-fader inserts. This is because of the way the Dolby Atmos Composer routes audio into the Dolby rendering engine, and Reaper unfortunately don't have that. So Reaper actually is not particularly well suited for Dolby Atmos. So I'm going to put that, and I know this is going to upset a lot of people, but I'm going to put that here into B tier. So it's a solid choice, but it's certainly not the best one. So the next one is Ableton, and Ableton is a strictly stereo DAW. So we have certain limitations already. We cannot work with Atmos beds, for example, or we can work with Atmos beds, but it requires a little bit of a workaround. Now, the nice thing about Ableton is that Ableton is actually one of those few DAWs where Dolby actually has specific instructions on how to work with Ableton and the Dolby Atmos renderer. And it also kind of works reasonably well with the Dolby Atmos Composer, even though it has the same issues that Reaper has in the sense that we don't have post-fader inserts, so we're running into the same problems. So, when it comes to Ableton, I would put that, B, C, let's put it into C tier, simply because we don't have multi-channel audio, and that is a big letdown. Now the next one is Cubase, and Cubase was one of the first digital audio workstations that had an integrated Dolby Atmos workflow, and to this day is one of the best choices that you have when you're working with Dolby Atmos. It is reasonably inexpensive. It has all the things that you need. If you want to work with the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, you can also use the post-fader inserts in Cubase, which is really cool. So it is actually a very solid choice. The only thing that you cannot do with Cubase is you cannot import Dolby Atmos master files. So in that sense, it is not completely perfect, but it is what it is. I think if you're starting out with Dolby Atmos and you are a Cubase user, you're certainly going to be happy with Cubase. I'm going to put that into A tier because we need a little space above. I have a certain feeling. There are a couple of other things that essentially do even better than Cubase. But Cubase, once again, very solid choice. Now, the next one here is Acoustic Mixcraft. Now, this is one that I actually have not a lot of experience with. It is, as far as I know, a digital audio workstation that only works on Windows. And my experiences with these types of digital audio workstations is that I always run into issues with plugin scanning. I think I installed it once, but did not get past the plugin scanning, and then I deinstalled it again. So I honestly don't really know. If there's anybody out there who uses Mixcraft with Dolby Atmos, let me know. I will really be interested to learn if this is a DAW that they can actually use with Dolby Atmos or not. But my ranking here is I honestly simply don't know. That's not something that I am particularly kind of familiar with. The next one here is Bitwig. Now, if you are a member of our Discord community, and I'm going to post a link, an invite link in the description below, you know that we have a lot of members that are very, very passionate about Bitwig. It is a very good DAW. It kind of suffers the same issues with Ableton, quite frankly, because it is very similar to Ableton. It's only stereo. You can make it work, but similar to Ableton, you're essentially limited by the fact that you have a stereo DAW. There are no multi-channel tracks that you can use. You can work with the external Dolby Atmos renderer, obviously. You can work with Fiedel Audio's Dolby Atmos Composer. There are no post-fader inserts, to my knowledge, but you can still work with it. So it falls into the same category as Ableton, really. So they are kind of very, very similar. Now, the next one is Reason, and very recently, actually, just kind of, at least kind of recently in terms of when I'm filming this video, this is actually going to go live a month after I'm filming it. Reason just kind of came out with Reason 13, and I have to be perfectly honest. I thought this was a big letdown. I'm not sure what these people are thinking. It is not really a full version upgrade. There are digital audio workstations that have much more impressive point upgrades, and Reason 13 doesn't really do much. And it's also a bit of an issue with, plugin scanning still doesn't really work, at least for me, not perfectly. I do have a full license to Reason, but I almost never use it. And, it's probably something that you could use with Dolby Atmos. I would assume that the Fiedel Audio Dolby Atmos Composer works fine in Reason, but I've never really kind of paid much attention to that. So I'm sure I'm going to kind of disappoint a couple of people, but I'm going to put it into D tier simply because there is so much possibility in terms of making a statement and in kind of trying to really improve your software, and then you come out with a new version that essentially is just not really doing anything and costs like $200 to upgrade, which I paid, but it's one of those things that I thought, why am I even doing that? But it is what it is. So Reason, I don't think so. Next one is the big daddy of all digital audio workstations, Pro Tools. Now, Pro Tools is actually interesting because it has done a lot in making Pro Tools a little better. So Pro Tools was for the longest time a digital audio workstation where people said this is the digital audio workstation of the past. There is no development, nothing is happening. But over the last couple of months, they actually really made a couple of changes that are really interesting, in particular with respect to immersive audio. Now, Pro Tools was always the go-to digital audio workstation when it came to using the external Dolby Atmos renderer, but the other options didn't really work. There was no internal Dolby Atmos renderer until recently, and the Fiedel Audio Dolby Atmos Composer did not work in Pro Tools. This was actually one of the few digital audio workstations where you couldn't use the Fiedel Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, and this was primarily because Pro Tools did not communicate the latency latency of the individual tracks correctly. So the Fiedel Audio Dolby Atmos Composer couldn't really match kind of the incoming tracks and kind of synchronize them. But this has all been addressed. So not that long ago, Pro Tools or Avid introduced an internal renderer into the Pro Tools family, which I think you actually have to have Pro Tools Ultimate for that purpose. And most importantly, they also fixed the latency issue, so you can now also work with the Fiedel Audio Dolby Atmos Composer. So the only thing that's really missing at that point are the post-fader inserts. But, I don't know. So everything else is actually fine. It's also, quite frankly, one of the few digital audio workstations that allow you to import master files. So this is really, really nice as well. I'm actually going to do 2 videos in the very near future. They're going to be released sometime in August, and where I'm going to look into the getting started with Dolby Atmos, both with the internal Dolby Atmos renderer as well as the external Dolby Atmos renderer with Pro Tools, because I think that is really, really cool. Now I'm struggling a little, honestly. It's certainly A tier. I would actually put that into S tier because it is, once again, kind of not that long ago, I would probably put it into B tier or even C tier. But with the integration of the internal Dolby Atmos renderer and the fact that they fixed the issues that prevented you from using the Field Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, I think that is actually a really excellent piece of software. The only problem, obviously, is you need Ultimate for that purpose, and that is really expensive. So, kind of that's something to consider. Okay, next one is Samplitude, and I just used Samplitude here as one of example of the Magix software. They have like 3. They have Acid, Samplitude, and Sequoia, I think, is the third one. I've never really used them for exactly the same reason. I did not use Mixcraft. Now, I do primarily use Mac operating systems, but I do have Windows machines as well. Actually, I'm filming this on a Windows machine, so I usually kind of also check out all the digital audio workstations that are Windows only. But the Magix software never kind of clicked with me. And one of the things that really kind of always annoyed me is their very weird marketing strategy. So you can get into the Samplitude or into the Magix software suites very, very cheaply by going with a humble bundle or something like that. But, kind of once you're in there, the upgrade price is almost the same as the new one. And kind of it's just not something that I really enjoyed. Once again, similar to Mixcraft, I don't know if anybody out there works with Dolby Atmos in one of the Magix software kind of DAWs. Let me know. I would really be interested to learn how that works. And if it works well, I might do a video about it. So just let me know. Next one is Studio One, and that is actually currently probably my favorite digital audio workstation. The reason for that is because the workflow, the Dolby Atmos workflow, is just so super simple. Presonus did an outstanding job in integrating Dolby Atmos into a DAW that was traditionally only stereo. So they kind of switched from a stereo DAW to a multi-channel DAW, integrated Dolby Atmos with a dedicated mastering bus, Dolby Atmos mastering bus. So it's super easy to use. And this kind of reminds me what I said before with Reason. Reason essentially kind of, if you compare the point upgrade that Presonus did with Studio One when they moved from Studio One 6 to 6.5, when they integrated Dolby Atmos essentially for free. And if you compare that to the full version upgrade of Reason, there isn't even a comparison. That's not even close. And I had the chance to talk to some of the people from Presonus that worked on the implementation of Dolby Atmos, and I'm seriously impressed on how well they work. So for me personally, it's probably my favorite DAW. I'm still not going to put that up to S tier simply because it has certain limitations in the sense that it does not allow you to import Dolby Atmos master files, and even though it is a very complete DAW, probably one of the completest DAWs that you can find, I always kind of felt a little uneasy with the user interface. I kind of quite often find myself searching for things because I'm searching them in a certain menu, and it's not really in that menu; it's in another menu. It's just it has so many options, and kind of so. In a way, what is really good about Studio One, the fact that it does everything, is also a little bit limiting because the user interface becomes a little bit I wouldn't necessarily say it becomes unusable, but it becomes difficult to navigate. So it has its learning curve. But it is not that expensive. So if you want to go into or get into Dolby Atmos, Studio One is certainly a good choice. Okay, so next one is Ardour. Now, Ardour, I added that here, even though kind of there is a second DAW that is actually based on Ardour that is actually much, much better when it comes to Dolby Atmos. Ardour, once again, is a stereo-only DAW. It kind of does not really lend itself that much to multi-channel audio. I'm assuming, I have never really used it with Dolby Atmos. I'm assuming you can use the Fetal Audio Dolby Atmos Compose. I'm pretty sure that you can. You most likely or most certainly actually also can work with the external Dolby Atmos renderer. So it is actually kind of fine, but it is not really perfect. So I don't know. D is probably a little kind of tough. Let's put it into C tier. Kind of similar to Bitwig and Ableton. So that's kind of those are really the pure stereo DAWs that you essentially kind of have these limitations just from the fact that they are stereo DAWs. So the next one is an interesting one, Digital Performer, and that is the one that kind of puzzles me to no end. And the reason for that is because the user base of Digital Performer are exactly the people that would need Dolby Atmos. Those are mostly people who are working with film and movies, that are doing sound engineering in film and movie production. And you would think that a DAW that has that particular audience does everything it can in order to kind of bring Atmos to its DAW. But Digital Performer, for some reason, didn't do that. On top of everything, Digital Performer has the ability to work with 12-channel tracks. So they already have 12-channel tracks in there. So from the system architecture, I don't see any reason why they couldn't integrate Dolby Atmos. It's not like in a stereo DAW where you have to completely kind of work around the fact that you have no multi-channel tracks. In Digital Performer, you actually have multi-channel tracks. They are there. For heaven's sake, please implement Dolby Atmos. But it's not only that, actually, kind of, it is even more complicated than that, because Digital Performer is a very old DAW that has its own kind of quirks when it comes to plugins. I did 2 videos about how to use Dolby Atmos with Digital Performer about a year ago, and I have to be perfectly honest with you, that Digital Audio Workstation fought me to the nail. I kind of spent so much time to get to the point where I could actually use Dolby Atmos with Digital Performer. It ended up working okay, but it is just a mess of one workaround after another workaround. And once again, the most disappointing thing about this is that this is actually a DAW that should kind of have that. Now, it could very well be that they're working on that. And quite frankly, when I did these 2 videos about Digital Performer a year ago, I kind of had I was a little bit afraid that I filmed those videos about a month before I put them online. And I was a little bit afraid that Moto would actually introduce a new version of Digital Performer and make my videos obsolete. As we now know, that hasn't happened because we are now 1 year later and it's still the same version. So I don't know, maybe it's this year. So maybe by the time you're watching this video, we have a version 12 of Digital Performer that can do Dolby Atmos natively. But as long as we are with Digital Performer 11, I'm going to put that into D tier. I know that's a little harsh because it is a nice digital audio workstation. I actually like it quite a bit, but kind of it's just such a missed opportunity. I don't know why they're doing that. So the next one is interesting, Mixbus. Now Mixbus is based on Ardour, and they recently implemented an internal Dolby Atmos renderer in the latest version of Mixbus. And that is actually quite unique in the sense that it does not, usually when you go from a stereo DAW to a Dolby Atmos capable DAW, you need to somehow figure out how to work with multi-channel tracks in your stereo DAW. And so usually what you have to do is you need to upgrade all your kind of system architecture in order to accommodate for multi-channel audio. This is what Presonus did with Studio One, for example. Now Mixbus decided to go a different route and essentially implement an internal Dolby Atmos renderer without implementing multi-channel audio. And that ended up being super usable. So if you want to have a digital audio workstation that is super easy to switch between Dolby Atmos and not Dolby Atmos, use Mixbus, because in Mixbus you just kind of tick one box, and suddenly everything becomes Dolby Atmos. There's no setup, nothing. You can simply kind of turn that into a Dolby Atmos project without doing anything other than kind of ticking a box. And that is super simple, super useful, particularly useful if you have already existing stereo sessions that you want to convert into Dolby Atmos. Mixbus does an outstanding job in doing that. Now, having said that, this comes obviously with severe limitations. So you cannot do Dolby Atmos bad tracks, for example. You simply can't do that because there are no multi-channel tracks in Mixbus. But it is a solid option. It really is. Now I'm struggling a little bit where to put that because, quite frankly, it's not A-tier because there are quite severe limitations. But it's certainly better than any of the stereo-only DAWs. So let's put it into B-tier. I think kind of that is very fitting and very suitable. Okay, the next one is a newcomer to the scene, and that is Luna from Universal Audio. Luna used to be a Mac-only DAW that you could only get when you had a Universal Audio interface, so when you had hardware. And not that long ago, they made it available to every Mac user, and then very recently, they also made it available to Windows user. I have not yet worked much with Luna. It is a free DAW, so that is really cool. It is a stereo-only DAW. It can do anything other stereo-only DAWs can do. So I'm assuming it works fine with the Dolby Atmos Composer and the external Dolby Atmos renderer. I have not really tried that yet, even though I'm planning to do a video probably later this year about how to use Dolby Atmos in Luna. It is a nice DAW, but it's not necessarily the DAW I would choose if I would go Dolby Atmos. So I'm going to put that here into C tier with all the other kind of stereo-only DAWs. Now the next one is BandLab, and I put that here because that is actually an interesting one. You know, BandLab purchased the software from Cakewalk, and they recently kind of started to publicize a new release of Sonar. And the main grievance with that is that while the scaled down version is free, the Sonar their new version of Sonar is actually relatively expensive. So you actually have to subscribe to their service in order to be able to access that. And I have not really done that yet. It's my understanding that Sonar actually is Mac as well, but some of the software is Windows only. I haven't really worked with that much yet. I vaguely remember that Sonar was capable of using multi-channel audio. If I'm wrong, let me know. But I think it was able to do that. But it's one of those things that I put in here for the sake of completeness, because I do believe that a lot of people, especially if you're just starting out, the fact that this is a completely free, at least the scaled-down version is completely free, is actually really nice. So I'm going to put that into Don't Know. It's just something that I have not that particular familiarity. Once again, if you've worked with Sonar, with the new version of Sonar, and you're using it with Dolby Atmos, let me know. I would be interested to learn more. Okay, next one is Logic Pro. Now, Logic Pro is one that is quite popular and that has a full integration of Dolby Atmos, unsurprisingly, because Apple is really going heavy into spatial audio. Now, one of the nicest things about Logic is the fact that it has the capability to work directly with your AirPods Pro or AirPods Max or some of the Beats headphones, and allows you to monitor your productions in exactly the same way it would somebody would hear it when they listen to it on an Apple device through Apple Music. And that's really cool. So for the longest time, this was very unique to Logic. However, over the last couple of months, there have been a number of plugins and other solutions that bring these capabilities of listening to or monitoring Dolby Atmos with Apple devices in an Apple kind of environment to other digital audio workstations. There's the Audio Movers by Binaural Renderer, for example. There is the Sphere monitoring, the virtual monitoring controller from Ginger Audio. So there are a couple of alternatives that you have now. So it's no longer unique in that sense, but it's still a nice DAW. My main issue with it is that it is somewhat incomplete in the way it treats multi-channel audio. So I wish it was a little bit more flexible. It's really very, very, very kind of tightly tied to kind of producing Dolby Atmos specifically. So you couldn't use it for Ambisonics, for example, or anything like that. So I'm going to put that. Now I'm a big Apple user once again, but I never got warm with Logic, so I'm going to put it here into B tier. I think that's where it belongs. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's just not perfect. Next one is Waveform, and Waveform is similar to any of the other stereo only DAWs. You can use that with the Field Audio Dolby Atmos Composer just fine. It works perfectly okay. It does not have post-fader inserts, at least to my knowledge. So that's a limitation. You can obviously also work with the external Dolby Atmos renderer. So traction waveform falls into the category of all stereo-only DAWs. So I'm going to put that here. It would be interesting to have Traction implement a Dolby Atmos and internal Dolby Atmos workflow, mainly because Waveform is also one of the few digital audio workstations that you can use on Linux. And if they do something similar to what Harrison did with Mixbus, for example, I think that could be a good solution. But at the moment, it is what it is. So I'm not necessarily a DAW I would choose for working with Dolby Atmos. Now, the next one is something that I just added in here because I recently did 2 videos about it. It's something that actually surprised me quite a bit, and that is Machine. Machine isn't really a full DAW, I know, but the thing that really surprised me is how well it works with the Dolby Atmos renderer from Field Audio. And if you want to know essentially how you can use Dolby Atmos with the Machine software, I'm going to leave some links in the description. Probably also a card here somewhere, probably up here. Or here, wherever, and there you can check out how that works. But it really kind of integrates extremely nicely with the Dolby Atmos Composer. Other than that, it's kind of goes the way of all stereo-only applications. So I'm going to put that here next to Waveform. I think you can work with it. But it's not necessarily something that I would choose to work with Dolby Atmos. So the next one is probably the most complete DAW that you can get other than Pro Tools, and that is Nuendo. Nuendo has a full integration of Dolby Atmos in their workflows. So it essentially uses the same approach as Cubase, and actually if you open up Nuendo and Cubase, there's almost no difference. It's very difficult to see where the actual differences are. The main difference is in some additional channel configuration that you have in Nuendo. So Nuendo goes up to the Hamasaki layout 22.2, the NHK kind of TV format. And when it comes to Dolby Atmos, the big thing is that in Nuendo you can actually import Dolby Atmos master files, and that actually works really, really well. And so in that sense, probably better than in Pro Tools, quite frankly. So in that sense, for me, that is really the perfect Dolby Atmos DAW. So if you want to it's a little bit more expensive, but if you want to kind of get the full kind of Dolby Atmos experience, I think, and you don't want to use Pro Tools, because quite frankly, one thing that I forgot to mention is that Pro Tools is a nightmare on Windows. I'm not quite sure why it still looks like it is running on Windows 7. Can you update the interface, please? So if you don't want to use Pro Tools because it's too expensive or it looks like from 2005, Nuendo is a solid option. It essentially does everything, or almost everything that Pro Tools does, and a little bit more, and works really, really well. Now, the next one is something that I also put in here, and whenever I talk about DaVinci Resolve in the context of Dolby Atmos music production, people point out it's actually not really a digital audio workstation, and that is true, but it has a relatively capable audio component, which was the old digital audio workstation Fairlight, which they integrated into DaVinci Resolve. And, this audio component in DaVinci Resolve has a really complete complete Dolby Atmos workflow. So when it comes to Dolby Atmos, DaVinci Resolve Fairlight is actually a really nice option. You need to purchase the studio version, so it's not in the free version. You actually need to purchase the studio version, but it has everything that you would want in a kind of working with Dolby Atmos, in the sense that you can create Dolby Atmos, you can import Dolby Atmos, and that also works really, really well. So you can import Dolby Atmos master files. My main grievance with DaVinci Resolve Fairlight is that it is a little bit inconsistent in what it really does with Dolby Atmos. Now, it is once again a nonlinear video editing software, so you would think it is actually designed to work for people who want to use Dolby Atmos movies or Dolby Atmos TV productions. And yes, you can do that. However, if you want to use Dolby Atmos with video in DaVinci Resolve Fairlight, you have to export that through the IMF format, which is a delivery format for Netflix and other streaming services like Disney, for example, Disney Plus. And that is similar to the Dolby Atmos master file, a file format that you cannot simply play. So you cannot drop that into a video player and play it. It's really a delivery format meant to create deliverables for the streaming services. So for the hobbyists out there, it's completely unusable because you can't play that at all. So in that sense, while it has a fully integrated Dolby Atmos workflow, that workflow doesn't really open itself up to people who are not professional movie producers who are producing for Netflix. It's kind of weird. Now, you could use obviously just the audio part of DaVinci Resolve Fairlight, but that suffers from the fact that it is not really a complete digital audio workstation. So there's certain things that just don't work particularly well. So I for example, I absolutely hate the automation kind of the way DaVinci Resolve kind of handles automation, and I don't think you can MIDI, for example. So it is a bit of a challenge. So what I'm going to do is, where do I put it? I think I'm going to put it here into Beat here, primarily because it's one of the few digital audio workstations or one of the few audio software applications that can actually import Dolby Atmos master files. And last but not least, FL Studio. And FL Studio, I have a kind of a very complicated relationship with. It's sort of a love-hate relationship. I do like its workflow. I think it's really, really nice, the way kind of you work with patterns. This pattern workflow seems to kind of lend itself towards the type of music that I usually like to produce. So I really like that. I never got fully around the user interface. There are certain things that just kind of make me a little uncomfortable. The windows that are everywhere is kind of it's a bit messy, quite frankly. But it is very inexpensive. You have lifelong updates. It's perfectly fine. And it was the digital audio workstation that I used when I first talked about Fiddle Audio's Dolby Atmos Composer. So yes, you can use it perfectly fine for Dolby Atmos with the Fiddle Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, and obviously also with the Dolby Atmos Renderer if you are on a Mac. The Mac implementation of FL Studio, by the way, is really, really good. It did not have a Mac implementation for the longest time, but when they actually implemented the Mac version of FL Studio, I think they did an outstanding job. It opens up immediately. That's one of the things that usually kind of you get surprised when you open up FL Studio and that it's just poops, it's here. There's almost no delay, and it's a really nice digital audio workstation, but not necessarily meant for Dolby Atmos production. So where do I put it? With all the other stereo digital audio workstations, let's put that here into C tier. And that concludes my tier list. I'm not exactly surprised about the things that I did here. There are a couple of things that kind of puzzle me. For example, as I said before, the fact that Digital Performer is just not doing the things that their audience actually want them to do, and then essentially when it comes to the top, it's really Steinberg with Cubase and Nuendo, Pro Tools obviously, and PreSonus with Studio One. So those are the ones that I would recommend if you want to go into Dolby Atmos. And that's everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server for a chat. An invite link is in the description below. I would particularly be interested in your experiences and opinions. Do you agree or disagree with me in my assessment? Did I miss any important digital audio workstation that I should have included? Let me know your thoughts. And with that being said, see you all in the next video.